What's up, Pilgrim? It's Maddie. I am in the mystery forest, and today I want to share with you how to get that wealth mindset. Now, the reason why I had to come up with this topic is because all I see out there in the world right now is utter peasantry. I just see people following the rules, telling other people what to do, and I know ultimately long term, they're just leading all these lemmings to their doom. So what I want to do right now is help you get into that wealth mindset so that you can take care of yourself, so you can make more money, so you can take care of your family, help more other people. Sound good? All right, keep listening. All right, so one of the biggest things I've noticed is that hanging out with a lot of people, all right, who are wealthy, who are considered wealthy in, I guess, the top 1% of the world, these people are some of the nicest people I've ever met in my entire life. And one of the reasons I believe this is because they failed themselves, right? They know how hard it is to become successful, right? They understand that success is like a slippery slope. You're gonna make it to the top of the mountain, but you can't just stay up there, right? It's like very muddy, and if you don't keep moving and you don't stay in momentum, then you're gonna start slipping and falling back down the mountain, and you're not gonna be on the top anymore. So I've seen these people, and they've told me, they're like, yeah, man, here's what I failed at, here's what I failed at, here's what I failed at, here's what I failed at. And I'm like, okay, now I understand why I'm, fairly successful right now and why they're extremely successful, right? Is because they had that persistence, they had that resilience to actually continue to push through. Another thing that I've noticed about these people who are very wealthy is that they're extremely generous. Like, I had one guy who is one of the nicest people I've ever met in my entire life, and he flew me out to his city, put me up in a hotel for a few days just to talk and consult with him, right? And I was like, this guy is absolutely amazing. And he had invited me over to his house. I had dinner with his family, and one of like the nicest dudes I've ever met in my entire life. So generous to his team too. Like, everyone else that knows this guy speaks so highly of him. So, and in my mind, I'm like, okay, how do I become like that guy? And one thing that this guy has is that, like, I remember I went to this marketing conference, all right? So I went to Funnel Hacking Live in 2019. And the funny thing is, I actually went there. I couldn't get a plane ticket for whatever reason. I think it was because just all the flights were full for that specific time period. So I'm like, okay, how else am I going to get there? So I had to actually book a Greyhound bus from Toronto to Nashville. And it was honestly one of the biggest mistakes and regrets I've ever made. But at the same time, it was a lesson for me to be like, oh, like, okay. And so with this bus trip, it took me a couple of days just to get from Toronto to Nashville. It was cold in this bus. My feet were hurting. I got cussed out a couple times by these bus drivers who thought they were so superior for whatever reason to everyone else. And I was just trying to ask and understand, and really just they would speak on the bus and they would kind of talk like this to you, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. So I'd have to ask the question after, being like, hey, I couldn't hear what you were saying. And this one guy was so put off. He's like, oh my God, like, why are you even asking this? So what ended up happening was, though, that I took this bus trip there and I met up with this group, and then this dude who I know, he's like, oh yeah, this guy's flying back to Montreal, so do you want to get in on his private jet? And I'm like, yeah, of course I would like to go on this private jet. And so the experience going from being in this bus where you're waiting and you just see the poverty in these bus stations when you're getting off, and it's loud in the bus, it smells bad in some cases, and I don't know, it's just not necessarily the safest way to travel and not the safest route of transportation, that's for sure. But this guy flew me back on his jet, and to him it was nothing. But I just remember, like, he calls up one of these Uber X's, right? They pick us up. The lady's so friendly. She's like, hey, can I take your luggage? And she takes our luggage, puts it in the Uber X, drives it to this private airport. And all you do at this private airport is you walk right onto the plane. You get off, you walk on the plane. Then when you get back into Canada, you get off. Customs comes on very briefly. They just ask you some simple questions, and then you're on your way. And I'm like, man, how do I get to this level, right? So I heard a few years back as well, it's like you have to kind of, when you have that little bit of a taste of success, or when you have kind of that taste of the lifestyle that rich and wealthy people have, it's very hard to kind of go back to that old lifestyle, right? So with me, I'm like, man, I'm never taking that bus trip again. I don't even want to fly like business class anymore, right? I just want to be flying on these jets all the time. So I'm like, okay, how do I get to that point, right? So I remember starting out, though, when I was just learning about how to make money and really just kind of getting out of a little bit of debt that I had at the time. I was traveling in Australia, right? And I'm in Perth. And I'd been partying a lot, and I just kind of had this moment where I'm like, all right, I'm done with partying, right? Like, I can't do this anymore. I'm kind of tired of this whole lifestyle. Like, I've done everything that I ever want to do when it comes to partying and having fun. So what do I want to do with the rest of my life, right? Like, do I want to go and work a 9 to 5 job? Do I want to go back to school and put myself in thousands of dollars in more debt? Or do I want to go and learn how to become an entrepreneur? And I was really leaning towards the last one, right? I'm like, okay, how do I start my own business? How do I become an entrepreneur? And so I went to this little secondhand bookstore and I started looking through all sorts of books, and this one popped out to me, right? And it was this book that Robert Kiyosaki co-authored with Donald Trump, and I believe it's called Why We Want You to Be Rich. And the biggest takeaway I had from that book is that you need to take care of your own financial IQ. And what they say is that financial IQ is a long-term thing, right? When I tell you the idea that you need to increase your financial IQ, you're probably like, oh, that's never going to happen. It's going to take forever, right? And a lot of people, they think too, it's like, oh, I'm just going to read this one book, or I'm going to take this one course, or I'm going to hire this coach, and it's going to be instant, right? I'm going to have that instant success. I'm not going to have to put any hard work into becoming successful. I'm just going to instantly have all that information, right? I'm going to be like Neo, and I'm just going to plug into my brain something, and it's just going to feed that information, and instantly I'm going to be a master in that thing. And realistically, that's not the way life is, right? So what I took away from that book though is like, okay, I'm going to have to increase my financial IQ. This is going to be a long-term game for me. I'm going to play the long-term game. I'm going to think at least 10 years in advance and be like, okay, how do I actually get myself out of debt? How do I learn a little bit more? How do I increase my financial IQ? How do I learn more about personal finance? How do I learn more about business, entrepreneurship, self-help, psychology, human behavior? How do I learn all these things? And so I kind of had my list of topics, and then when I ended up going back from Australia to Canada, I'm like, okay, I'm going to get a job and I'm going to work there, and I'm just going to learn the ins and outs of the business, right? I'm going to ask lots of questions, and I'm just going to be very curious. And at the same time, instead of just going home at night and watching TV like 99% of people do, right? And they watch these mindless shows just to escape their boring doldrum of a life, I'm just going to start reading more books, right? I'm going to increase my financial IQ even more. I'm going to start taking courses. I'm going to invest in coaches, right? I'm going to invest my money into myself because I feel that that's the best way I can actually spend my money. So that's what I did, right? I got this job working in a cubicle. And when I say working in a cubicle, most people are like, oh, I don't want to have to do that. It's like, oh, and they're so prideful and they feel so entitled, right? They're like, oh, I'm a university student, right? I spent like $60,000 on getting this degree. I should not have to work in a cubicle because I am the greatest thing since sliced bread. And in reality, dude, like, you're just a regular person. You need to be a little bit more humble. You need to think long term, all right? So that's essentially what I started doing. And I just started reading books, and there would be sometimes when I would read books and I wouldn't get anything out of it. But I'll give you 3 books right now that I think are really good for personal finance, all right? So number 1, I would say, is Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Biggest takeaway you're going to get out of this book is the difference between what an asset is and what a liability is, right? I'll give you a great example of how people think about this, all right? So poor person mindset, they're like, oh, I'm going to buy a house and then it's going to be my little nest egg that I'm going to sit on. And then when I retire at 65 and I've basically just lived that kind of boring life for doing some random job that I don't like, I'm going to retire and live off the money of the house. And, you know, that might have worked for the baby boomer generation, but, you know, millennials and Generation Z, it's not going to be the same for them, all right? It's not going to happen, right? It's so hard, actually, for my generation to even buy a house, specifically in the city. Like, housing prices in Toronto are absolutely out of control. It's a bubble that continues to just go up and never pop for whatever reason, whereas every economic bubble eventually has to pop. So that's, by the way, where I'm going to come in. I'm, you know, basically saving up some money, and I'm going to buy some land eventually, very soon. Hopefully the bubble pops and I can just go in. But what I took away, though, was from that book was that, again, a house, for example, is not an asset, right? It's a liability. If you think about this, you need to buy that house, all right? So you need to put some money up, then you have to pay off the mortgage, then you have to pay rent, you have to pay taxes on that house, you have to fix things as they break, you have to pay for insurance on that house. So if you think about it, sure, long term, maybe a house is an asset, but again, it's still going to cost you a lot of money throughout your lifetime repairing that house, right? Spending money on taxes and insurance for that house, okay? So that's one of the biggest takeaways that I actually had from Rich Dad Poor Dad. So again, I would totally recommend that you take and read that book. Next book that I would totally recommend is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Again, this is a pretty quick read, but it's kind of like one of the original OG books. I think he interviewed Henry Ford at the time, and he interviewed, who was it, Andrew Carnegie, who I think were the two of the richest men at the turn of the last century. And so he just interviewed them, picked their brains, and got all sorts of ideas in there. But he again talks about, you think basically one way, right? You're thinking like a poor person. You need to start thinking like a rich person, right? You need to start thinking to yourself like, okay, when you see something and you're like, oh, that's too expensive, you need to reframe that question and be like, okay, how could I afford that thing? All right, because again, if you're looking at that thing and you know it's going to help you, it's going to be that vehicle that's going to help take you to the next level in your life, then I would do everything in my power, to be honest, to come up with the resources that I could actually afford to buy that specific thing if I know it's going to help me go to the next level. All right, so that's another book I would recommend, Think and Go Rich. Final book I would recommend is The Richest Man in Babylon. Biggest takeaway I'd say I have from The Richest Man in Babylon is to start saving about 10 to 25% of all of your earnings and then putting those into long-term assets, right? So you can put those into real estate, you can put those into like gold and silver, you can put those into what I recommend. Don't buy individual stocks, you want to buy index funds. This isn't like investment advice, and I'm not an advisor, but again, I'm just telling you exactly what I do, right? That's what I invest in. I also invest in cryptocurrency because I know this is going to be an absolutely gigantic market, and I feel that not having 1% of your portfolio in cryptocurrency right now in 2021 is actually riskier than not having any money in that market, because it's going to be absolutely gigantic. We're not talking trillions, we're talking quadrillions of dollars that's going to be in this market. So that's what I would recommend doing, right? Do what the richest man, they say in The Richest Man in Babylon. Don't just take all your money and spend it on fancy pants and lollipops and all sorts of thrills and very inexpensive frills. Don't do that, okay? You want to take that money and again, put it into investments. That could also be investments in yourself, right? You can buy books, you can buy courses, you can hire coaches and consultants to actually help you out. But again, you want to take away some of that money, right? And that's going to be your actual nest egg. And again, if you invest that right into assets, then long term, you're going to be a lot better, right? And this video, I'd say, is more so for people who are a little bit more awake, right? I don't do this for kind of brain dead people who are kind of living what I like to call, or what's referred to as, the deferred life plan, right? Where they're like, okay, I'm just going to go to school, and then I'm going to go to college, and then I'm going to get a job, and I'm going to get married and get 2 kids and get a house and have 2 cars and retire at 65, and those are going to be my golden years. Like, when I looked at that and I heard about that, I'm like, I couldn't imagine actually doing that with my life, right? I'm kind of with my life, right? Like, I like to go off the beaten path, right? There's kind of the beaten path that school really forces you in, right? Which is a big problem with our education system. They basically teach you how to memorize things. They don't teach you how to think critically. They don't actually teach you how to make money. I remember going to university and I was looking through and choosing my courses. I'm like, where's the how to make money with writing course? Like, where is that in the curriculum? And that frustrated me, and that's one of the reasons I actually ended up dropping out of university, is because they didn't really have anything. Sure, I could have gone to business school, but business school wouldn't teach me copywriting. Business school wouldn't teach me how to build funnels. It wouldn't teach me social media marketing, how the internet works, cryptocurrency. It might teach me the very basics of that, right? But all they're teaching you, I think, in the mainstream media and in school in general, is just to, again, how to live that deferred life plan, right? How to get a good job. It's so ridiculous right now because we've never had a population of people where we've had so many people in the Western culture who have actually graduated university and have degrees, but they can't find jobs, right? Because they want to basically become the CEO right away, right? They don't want to start out in the mailroom and have to move up in that company. And even then, those CEO positions are so scarce that it's probably not going to happen, right? You're honestly better off investing in yourself, right? Figuring out how to become an entrepreneur, and then you can just leave your job and be like, yo, you know what? Now I am the CEO, right? And that's kind of what I did, right? Again, I didn't go on the beaten path. I went way off the beaten path and kind of, went on just a different route that wasn't what the average person would say, right? What mediocre people would say, right? And so what you want to essentially do, right, and this is kind of a Grant Cardone thing that he talks about, is like the biggest problem people have is they don't know how to make more money, they don't know how to keep that money, and then they don't know how to multiply that money, right? So what I really do with my strategy is I'm like, okay, how do I make more money? And then I go out there and I actively make more money. And then again, I figure out a way to not give that money to businesses and other people and lose that money. I look for a way so I can put it into assets that long term are going to yield me more rewards and actually get me to a place of financial freedom. So that was basically what I wanted to talk about today. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I want you to like this video, leave a comment below. Maybe there's a financial book for personal finance you want to recommend to other viewers of this channel. And if you want to consider subscribing, I would really appreciate that. And you can also be notified when the next video drops by hitting the bell notification. I'm Matty Mills. I'll see you next time. And in the meantime, I want you to be blessed and be grateful.